What was it like being around DMX?
DMX was dangerous, man.
Straight up like that. Whoever don't like it, bring it, nigga. Bring it. Bring it. Bring it.
When you talk about the wildest rappers to ever step into hip-hop, DMX gotta be at the top of that list. He wasn't just a superstar. He was a straight-up force of nature. Most rappers played the industry game, worried about image, money, and radio spins. But DMX, he lived every lyric he spit, raw and uncut. And that's why when he hit the West Coast during the height of his fame, the tension was instant. LA had its own culture, its own rules, and one of the biggest was this. If you weren't from there, you had to check in with the local gangs. DMX didn't believe in checking in with nobody. Now, that check-in culture was serious. Rappers from the East Coast or down south who wanted to move safely in LA had to make sure they showed respect, usually by linking with gangs like the Rollin' 60s, Crips, or Bloodsets that controlled the streets. It wasn't just about respect, it was survival. But DMX came from Yonkers with that rugged, no-fear attitude. He felt like nobody owned him, nobody could tell him where he could or couldn't go. That refusal to bow down made him respected by some, but it also made him dangerous to others. DMX had a reputation for being unpredictable. There's stories of him walking into clubs, seeing dudes with chains on, and just snatching them off their necks in broad daylight. Not because he needed the jewelry, but just to prove he could. There was even a time he pulled a razor blade from under his tongue in the middle of an argument, leaving people shook at how wild he could get. And it wasn't just in the streets. Even on stage, he couldn't turn it off. At one comedy event, DMX accidentally swung on Jay Pharoah after the comedian impersonated him. Not realizing X took things that personal, that was DMX in a nutshell. Unpredictable, fearless, and never playing by the rules.
And nobody in this nigga crew running behind him to stop this nigga. So I'm like, whoever this nigga is, he official. They ain't want no smoke with this nigga.
But that same energy is what sparked one of his deadliest beefs, the war with Crips from the Dog Pound. Crips wasn't just any rapper. He was tied to the Rollin' 60s Crips, and he had powerful connections on the West Coast through Big U, one of the most feared figures in LA. When DMX came into town ignoring the check-in system, it rubbed Crips and his camp the wrong way. Things got even messier when rumors started flying that DMX might have been connected to a studio shooting in LA where two of Crips' bodyguards ended up dead. Whether or not X was really involved, the streets believed he had something to do with it. And in LA, perception is reality. From that point on, the tension between DMX and Crips wasn't just rap beef. It was street politics tied to gangs, blood, and revenge. And as if that wasn't enough fuel, a woman came into the picture that made things even uglier. Foxy Brown. At the time, Foxy was engaged to Crips, but rumors started swirling that she was also messing with DMX on the low. In hip-hop, women often became pawns in beefs, but this wasn't just about gossip. Crips was ready to marry Foxy. And if DMX really was sliding in behind his back, it wasn't just betrayal. It was disrespect on the highest level. Whether true or not, the rumors gave Crips all the reason he needed to take shots at DMX, both in the streets and on wax. The beef heated up quickly. Crips dropped his infamous diss record calling out names where he went at DMX directly and even dragged Nas into the mix, accusing him of also being tied up with Foxy. It was one of the rawest diss tracks of the late 90s, and it painted DMX as a snake who couldn't be trusted around friends or women. For Crips, it was war, and DMX, he wasn't about to stay quiet either. The DMX-Crips beef hit a whole new level when Foxy Brown got caught in the middle. At the time, Foxy was one of the hottest female rappers out, moving with Nas, Jay-Z, and holding her own in a male-dominated game. But behind the scenes, her love life was pure chaos. She was engaged to Crips, part of the Dog Pound, but the streets whispered that she had something going on with DMX. Whether it was true or just gossip, it didn't matter. In hip-hop, perception is everything, and for Crips, it was the ultimate disrespect. Foxy had a reputation for being wild and unpredictable herself. She'd beef publicly with Lil' Kim, make bold moves, and keep her name buzzing. So when word spread that she might have had DMX in her corner while still tied to Crips, it was like throwing gasoline on an already burning fire. Crips wasn't about to let it slide. He went straight to the booth and unleashed one of the most legendary diss tracks of the late 90s, calling out names. On the track, Crips didn't hold back. He called out DMX directly, accusing him of betrayal, of messing with his fiancée and breaking street codes. But he didn't stop there. He dragged Nas into it too, hinting that Foxy was bouncing between them both. The record wasn't just personal, it was surgical. Corrupt laid it all out in detail, breaking down the triangle and airing out names like nobody else dared to. At a time when subliminals were the norm, calling out names was straight up war. The track shook the culture. Fans debated if Corrupt went too far, dragging personal relationships into rap beef. Others said it was fair game. DMX disrespected him, so he fired back with everything he had. For Corrupt, this wasn't just about music. This was about pride, loyalty, and his reputation on the West Coast. And with Foxy Brown's name in the middle, it made the drama bigger than just two rappers. DMX being DMX wasn't about to take that kind of disrespect lightly, but instead of dropping a direct diss record, he chose a smarter route. He turned his anger into one of the biggest hits of his career, Party Up, Up in Here. On the surface, it sounded like a club anthem, a high-energy track perfect for radio and parties. But if you really listen to the lyrics, it was filled with subliminals aimed squarely at Corrupt. Lines about clowns, fake gangsters, and people fronting like they're hard, but not really built for it. Those weren't random bars. Fans in the know said DMX was talking directly to Corrupt and his camp, clowning them while still creating a record that crossed over globally. It was genius. Instead of wasting a diss on Corrupt that might have stayed underground, DMX used his mainstream platform to take shots while still racking up hits. And it worked. Party Up became one of DMX's most iconic tracks, played everywhere from clubs to sports arenas, while still carrying the sting of a diss. That move proved DMX's brilliance. He could turn personal beef into global success, and it left Corrupt in a tough spot. How do you respond to a diss hidden inside a worldwide hit? You can't, because every time the record played, the whole world was already singing along. The beef didn't just live in the music, though. Behind the scenes, tension was real. Rumors about the studio shooting in LA, where two of Corrupt's bodyguards were killed, still swirled. Whispers tied DMX to it, though nothing was ever proven. Add that to the Foxy Brown drama, and it painted DMX as the ultimate villain in Corrupt's story. The outsider who disrespected his woman, his crew, and his city. But the truth is, DMX wasn't playing by anybody's rules. He didn't check in, he didn't ask for permission, and he didn't apologize for the chaos he left behind. That unpredictability made him a legend, but it also made him a target. If there's one thing about DMX, it's that he never backed down from anybody. When he hit LA, he didn't care about the politics, the check-in system, or the fact that whole sets controlled neighborhoods. He moved like he owned every room, every block, every stage. That energy is what made him a star in Yonkers, but in LA, it came with consequences. DMX's reputation spread fast. Stories popped up about him walking into packed clubs and sizing up the toughest dude in the room. If he spotted a shiny chain, he'd just snatch it off. Not because he needed it, but because he wanted to prove nobody could check him. One story had him leaving the club with 2 chains in his pocket while the dudes who owned them just stood frozen, too shocked to react. That was X. Unpredictable, reckless, but fearless. There was also the legendary moment when he pulled a razor blade from under his tongue in the middle of a heated argument. Nobody even knew he had it hidden there. He leaned in, blade glinting under the lights, and left people shook. That type of move was straight out of prison culture. The kind of trick you'd hear about in Rikers, not at a Hollywood after-party. But DMX wasn't built for Hollywood. He carried Yonkers with him everywhere, and that raw edge clashed with LA's gang politics. See, on the West Coast, respect was currency. Out-of-town rappers usually linked with big names like Snoop Dogg, Big U, or Suge Knight to make sure they moved safely. DMX didn't care about that. He didn't check in, didn't shake hands, didn't pay homage. To some, that made him authentic. He wasn't bending to the system. But to others, especially gangs like the Rollin' 60s Crips tied to Corrupt, it was blatant disrespect. That tension boiled over with the rumors about the studio shooting. 2 of Corrupt's bodyguards were killed in LA during a late-night session, and whispers tied DMX's name to the scene. Nothing was ever proven, and X never spoke on it. But in the streets, perception is reality. If people believed DMX was behind it, that was enough to brand him as a threat. And for Corrupt, who was already heated about the Foxy Brown situation, the shooting gave him more reason to go at X. By this point, the feud wasn't just bars on wax, it was blood in the air. Corrupt had already dropped calling out names, blasting DMX and dragging Nas into the mix. DMX clapped back with subliminals on Party Up, turning his anger into a record the whole world danced to. But behind the scenes, tensions were so high that every time DMX set foot in LA, people wondered if violence would break out. Gangs had mixed feelings about him. On one hand, they respected his rawness. He didn't move with security the way other rappers did, and he didn't show fear. That kind of confidence got him love in certain circles. But on the other hand, his refusal to follow protocol made him a target. West Coast politics didn't care about fame. If you disrespected the rules, you paid the price. Still, DMX had a way of commanding respect wherever he went. Even those who wanted him gone had to admit he was built different. Most rappers needed entourages, but X could roll up solo, pit bull chain around his neck, and people would hesitate before stepping to him. That aura, half fear, half admiration, is what kept him alive in a city where outsiders usually got swallowed up. But with Kurupt and the Dog Pound pushing back, the situation was volatile. Both camps had pride on the line, and both had something to prove. The Foxy Brown Triangle made it personal, the studio shooting made it deadly, and the music made it global. At that point, it wasn't just about beef, it was about survival. As heated as the DMX versus Kurupt feud got, it never fully spiraled into an all-out war. The beef lived heavy in the music, the rumors, and the streets, but over time, both men started to realize it wasn't worth carrying forever. By the mid-2000s, hip-hop was shifting. The East Coast-West Coast tension that once fueled violence was fading, and newer generations were stepping in. DMX was battling his own demons, arrests, addiction, and the roller coaster of fame, while Kurupt was trying to rebuild his own lane with Dog Pound. The fire cooled, but the scars stayed. One of the turning points came years later when DMX and Kurupt ran into each other at an airport. Instead of hostility, the two shared a mutual nod and eventually squashed the beef. There weren't cameras rolling, no big press conference, just two men who'd lived through enough chaos deciding to let it go. For Kurupt, time healed the wound. For DMX, he had bigger battles than rap beef. By then, X had been in and out of jail, fighting for his career and his health. Holding on to grudges wasn't his focus anymore, but that doesn't mean the beef is forgotten. To this day, hip-hop heads still bring up Calling Out Names and debate if it's one of the hardest diss tracks of all time. Others still analyze Party Up and point to the subliminals as proof that DMX clapped back without ever needing to name names. The drama with Foxy Brown still gets mentioned in conversations about messy hip-hop love triangles, and the rumors about the studio shooting remain one of the darkest clouds over X's LA legacy. Looking back, it's clear that DMX's presence in LA shook the West Coast to its core. Most outsiders came in humbled, moving carefully, paying respect to the local politics. DMX wasn't built like that. He moved reckless but authentic, and that authenticity is why even those who clashed with him had to admit he was real. Whether he was pulling razor blades from under his tongue, stealing chains in the middle of a crowded club, or barking his way through an arena show, DMX lived exactly the way he rapped, raw, unfiltered, and untouchable. And that's what makes his legacy so powerful. DMX didn't just make music, he created moments. He gave fans anthems that still bang today, from Rough Riders' anthem to Where the Hood At. He brought vulnerability into his music too, praying on stage, crying in interviews, showing the world that toughness and pain go hand in hand. That balance made him more than just a rapper. It made him a voice for the broken, the underdogs, the ones fighting battles nobody else could see. The feud with Kurupt is just one chapter in that story. It showed how unpredictable and fearless DMX really was, willing to go toe-to-toe with anyone, even on their home turf. But it also showed how dangerous that life could get. One misunderstanding, one rumor, and you could end up in the middle of bloodshed. DMX walked that line his whole life, and sometimes it made him a target, but it also made him a legend. When DMX passed in 2021, the tributes came from everywhere, east, west, down south, even overseas. Kurupt himself showed respect, acknowledging X's impact on the culture. All the beef, all the tension, all the messy history didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that DMX's name will never be forgotten. So whether you remember him for his wild antics in LA, his legendary beef with Kurupt, or the way his voice could shake an arena, one thing is for sure, DMX was one of one. He didn't bow down to anybody, he didn't play by the rules, and he never faked who he was. And that's why, even with all the chaos and controversy, his legacy stands tall. Because in hip-hop, there will never be another Dark Man X.